Hello again. So this lesson, or this part of this lesson, we're going to continue on and talk about two-way tables and graphs. So that means when we're dealing with two categorical variables, what does that look like? So today's objective, you're going to create and interpret data or table and graphical representations of categorical data, but more specifically for two variables. So we're going to start with a two-variable or two-way table. So Miss Calvin, that is me, also surveyed her statistics classes and created the two-way table below. Two-way tables summarize data on the relationship between two categorical variables. So now, instead of just having the one variable that we talked about in the first part of this lesson that we did in class, where we just talked about the different lunch types, burgers, tacos, nachos, bagel, and pizza, we also have a second variable, which is what class period the person who answered the survey question was in. So I have second period, third period, and sixth period. So we have those two variables, the lunch type and the class period. So one thing that you're asked a lot of questions about in terms of two-way tables is to find percentages. And really, to find percentages, the first thing you're going to want to do is to figure out what are all the totals of each row and column. So I'm going to do that first. Sometimes tables that you're given already include the totals, but not always. So if you're not including the totals, if they don't give you the totals, you want to do that first. So I'm just going to add together. For burgers, the total is 22. That means 22 total people said they liked burgers. For tacos, the total is 12. For nachos, the total is 7. So I'm just adding up the entire row of numbers and putting that number on the right-hand side in that column. And I'm going to do the same thing, find out how many total people are in second period. There's 61 people total. I forgot about that one. So there's 13 people in second period, 24 people in third period, and 24 people in sixth period. So that just came from adding the columns for each period. So now I can start answering questions about percentages, such as what percent of students prefer burgers? So that means out of all the students, out of all 61 students, we want to know what percent of them prefer burgers. So I can see from my table that I have 22 total people who said they preferred burgers out of 61. So I'm going to do 22 divided by 61 in my calculator, and that gives me a decimal of 0.36. And then to turn that into a percent, we just multiply by 100, or you can move the decimal place to the right 2 times, and that gives us 36%. Right? By the way, if you don't have a calculator handy at home, right, this kind of math can be done really, really simply with the calculator that's on your phone, so you're welcome to use that. You can also use Google as a calculator. If you type 22/61, it'll open the calculator, or you can even Google calculator and it will pull that up for you. So that's that question. Second one, what percent of students are in Miss Calvin's second period? So I'm going to look at the total number of people in second period, which is 13 out of 61 people total. Gives me a decimal of 0.2131 from the calculator, which if we multiply by 100 or move the decimal place to the right 2 times, I get a percentage of 21.3%. So now I'm going to ask a tiny bit of a trickier question, which is what percent of students in Miss Calvin's survey are in third period and prefer burgers? So that word "and" means I'm not just talking about like a total. Now I want to know someone who is in 2 specific categories. So I want someone who prefers burgers, so that's this top row, and I want the people who are in third period, so that's this middle column. So if I find that intersection, I see that there are 7 people who prefer burgers and are in third period. So 7 people out of the 61 gives me 0.115 if I use my calculator. And then of course, if I multiply that by 100 or move the decimal place over twice, I get 11.5%. Okay, so when we specify 2 categorical variables, usually with the word "and" in between, like we saw there, third period and prefer burgers, for a relative frequency, we call this a joint relative frequency. And to calculate it, you divide the counts that fall into the one cell for both categories. So we're finding kind of that one cell that falls into both categories I call it the intersection of those two things. We take that number and we divide by the total for the entire table. So if I wanted to find what is the joint relative frequency for sixth period and tacos, so I'm going to find sixth period, which is this third column on the right, and I'm going to find tacos, which is the second row. I'm going to look at where they intersect, or which cell is in both of those categories, which is 4. And 4 out of 61 is 6.6%. The decimal was 0.066. So multiply by 100, move your decimal place over twice, you get 6.6%. Now I'm going to twist this up a little bit more and ask you this question. It says, what percent of sixth period students prefer tacos? So every question we've had before this has asked what percent of students, right? Before that, on the last page, we had what percent of students. But now we're asking what percent of sixth period students. So now I'm no longer talking about this entire total 61 students. Now I'm really only caring or wanting to know about sixth period students. So this time, when I talk about this frequency, when I find this frequency with division, I'm only talking about the 24. So in sixth period, I can see that 4 of them prefer tacos out of 24 people total, right? So we call this a conditional relative frequency. Conditional meaning we're putting a condition on it. I'm no longer talking about all students. I'm now saying only sixth period. We call that conditional, right? So a conditional relative frequency gives the percent of individuals that fall into a specific category for one variable among everyone who falls into a specified category for the other. And to calculate it, we divide the counts that are in both categories by the total for the given category. That is a lot of words that maybe potentially are getting jumbled up in your heads right now. But what that means, what I like to look at it as, is if we're saying of sixth period students, that means I only care about sixth period students. So it's almost like I'm pretending that the rest of this table doesn't even exist. For just this moment, I'm only going to look at the sixth period students. In that column of sixth period students, we want to know what percent of them prefer tacos. So we say 4 out of 11. Or I'm sorry, 4 out of 24, which is 16.7%. So just as another practice down here, given that a student prefers tacos, what percent of them are in sixth period? I'm going to erase my previous marking so I can do this one. So we want to know, given that a student prefers tacos. So that means we're only going to care about the taco row, right? Everything else in this table doesn't matter anymore. So given that a student prefers tacos. So only out of these people right here, we want to know what percent of them are in sixth period. So I have 4 people in that row are in sixth period out of 12 people total, right? So we do 4 divided by 12, which is 33.3%. Ah, now I have to erase it. There we go. So when we graph a two-way table, the most common way to graph a two-way table is with a side-by-side bar graph, okay? Which is basically just like making separate bar graphs for each value of one category. So basic side-by-side bar graph would look something like this, right? I have second period, third period, sixth period, kind of separated with a gap in between. And then for each class period, I have a bar representing each food type, right? So I just and I put frequencies on the side, just numbers of students or numbers of responses in each category. And that's basically what a side-by-side bar graph looks like. But what I'm going to teach you guys how to make in this lesson is a side-by-side bar graph that's using percentages. So instead of dealing with frequencies, we're going to look at one that deals with percentages, which means the first thing we have to do is we have to convert the relative frequencies, or we will need to convert the numbers to relative frequencies so that the total in each category adds up to 100. So what that means is I'm basically going to split this up and look at second period, third period, and sixth period as 3 separate classes so that I can make 3 separate bar graphs, right? And I'm going to find the percentage within each category. So these are given or conditional percentages. So again, I'm kind of just for the moment, I'm going to ignore third and sixth period, right? I'm only going to look at second period, and I'm going to see what percent of second period chose burgers, what percent of second period chose tacos, what percent of second period chose nachos, what percent of second period chose bagel, what percent of second period chose pizza, right? So it takes a minute. So for example, this is kind of saying what I just said. We're basically making 3 different graphs, one for second, one for third, one for fourth, or sixth, and we're putting them all in the same graph. So again, kind of doing those conditional problem or conditional frequencies. So this first thing says what's percent of the people what's the percent who prefer burgers in second period? So in second period, 4 out of 13 prefer burgers. So if I do that division, I get 30.8%. The percent who prefer tacos in second period. On second period, 4 out of the 13 prefer tacos. The 4 out of 13 is 30.8%. Right? I did the other ones for you for second period just to make this faster. So for third period, right, we want what percent of third period likes burgers, so 7 out of 24, and then tacos would be 4 out of 24. Oops. All right, so we have all those numbers. So if we get to this last one, I did the percent of sixth period who prefers burgers for you. So percent of sixth period that prefers tacos, right, would be 4 out of 24. Right, so 11 out of 24 prefer burgers, 4 out of 24 prefer tacos. I just did the nachos, bagel, and pizza for you to make us move through this a little bit faster. So once we do that, we get, and there's that last one, all right, this is our now relative frequency bar graph, right? So what I can do with that is I can turn that into a bar graph. Right? So the first thing is I'm going to set up my scale on the y-axis. The highest percentage from my list over here was 46%, so I just need to make sure my y-axis goes up to at least 46%. So I'm going to make it go to 50, and then I'll just kind of put in some little other ones along the way so I have something to go for. I'm going to separate my second, my third, and my fourth period. So all I did, right, was I went back to my chart I just made with the percentages, and I created these bars for each one. So I have, for second period, it was like 30.8% chose burgers, 30.8% chose tacos, it was about 15% chose nachos, around 8% chose a bagel, and then around 15% chose pizza, right? So I've made the bars as tall as they need to be to match up with the percentages. And then I did that for third and for sixth period. The very, very important thing that we want to make sure and include, this is called a legend because I used colors as opposed to just labeling them, which would have looked messy. Because I used colors to represent each type of food, I want to make sure and have a legend that says what each color represents. And then the last thing I need to make sure and include is a title, something like preferred lunch or what is your favorite lunch or something like that, that would tell the reader of this chart what this actually means. And then the last thing, this is our last slide, we can take that same graph that we just created and we can turn it into a segmented bar graph, which is just like a side-by-side, except that we now stack all of the categories for each class period on top of each other so that they add up to 100%. So what that would look like is on my little graph over here, I'm going to go up to 100%. I'll put in those little intermediate steps along the way. I'm going to have 1 bar for second, 1 bar for third, and 1 bar for sixth. And I'm really just going to stack those things on top of each other. So for second period, right, I had about 30.8% who preferred burgers, another 30.8% preferred tacos, So about 15% chose nachos, about 8% chose the bagel, and about 15% chose the pizza. So we're just stacking those same graphs. So if I go back to my graph over here, it's kind of like I'm taking each of these bars that are separate on the side-by-side bar graph, and I'm stacking them on top of each other. And we know they add to 100% because no one was allowed to pick two different foods on this one. So it's going to add up to 100%, right? And then I would do the same thing for each class period, right? So there's my one for third, and there's my one for fourth. I just kind of took those bars and added or stacked them on top of each other. And that is called a segmented bar graph. It's just another way of representing that same information. So a lot of what we did today with the two-way table is about finding percentages. So if that's something you need help and practice with, make sure you let me know so I can help you with that. But that is it for now.